I live in Charlotte, North Carolina with my family. I'm an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I'm also a New Testament scholar, and I currently teach at Queen's University of Charlotte. My understanding of the conflict has evolved over time, probably like most people's. I have had the good fortune of traveling to the Holy Land 3 times and have had 3 very different experiences. The first was as a part of an interfaith, Jewish-led group from Greensboro, when I had a chance to get to know some of our Jewish neighbors here in Greensboro and to walk in the Holy Land just before I went back to graduate school in biblical studies. So that was a tremendous opportunity to have a first experience in the Holy Land. 6 years later, our family was on sabbatical for the summer, and we had the opportunity to spend a month at Tantur Ecumenical Institute, which is just outside of Jerusalem and within sight of the wall that was being constructed at the time. We went, I would say, as pretty naive folks. We had the opportunity to enroll our kids in a day camp in Bethlehem. So every day while I went to the library and worked on a book, my husband would walk our children through the wall, meet with a taxi driver, and drive them to a day camp run by Christmas Lutheran Church. There are a lot of myths around this topic. And I think of maybe 3 at the top of my list. One is the myth of parity. And by that I mean this notion that, yeah, the Israelis do some bad things and the Palestinians do some bad things. And on the one hand, here's a bad actor on this side. And on the other hand, here's a bad actor on that side. But that kind of myth, which I think is pervasive, implies that the 2 groups are on equal footing from a power standpoint, from a freedom standpoint, from a sense of human rights. So I think that's sort of that's a, as I say, a hugely pervasive myth that is dangerous and corrosive because it takes the focus away from the reality of the situation. Another really pervasive myth is the myth of complexity. People often back away from the topic because they say it's just too complicated, I can't understand it. And sure, the occupation has complex dimensions to it. I mean, it's different for the people, Palestinian Israelis who live in the Galilee, or residents of East Jerusalem, or residents of Ramallah or Al-Khalil. So there is complexity. But really the answer is simple. Really the issue is a matter of human dignity and wholeness, civil rights, equal opportunity for all, which means the end of the occupation. It's just not rocket science, as many folks would like us to believe, because I think it's in the interest of the powers that be in the situation to obfuscate and to cast an aura of complexity over it. A third myth has to do with, and I encountered this a lot among the Jewish community, folks that I talk to there, this notion that Palestinians hate Israelis and want them all to die. This just doesn't bear out under the countless conversations that I have had with real live Palestinian people. Do they think the occupation is evil? Absolutely, and they have grounds for that. But they somehow have this amazing ability to separate the system from the people. And I remember encountering this the first time we were in Bethlehem. That taxi driver who drove our kids to day camp invited us over to his home. He just had a brand new baby, and I couldn't believe that they welcomed us into their home for dinner, and they did. They had this elaborate feast. And we were sensitive about it. We were Americans. We know how heavily America supports Israel. We were kind of new to understanding anything in any depth about the conflict. And they welcomed us with the warmest hospitality we had ever experienced from strangers. And we asked them, we said, how can you be this nice to us when our government is harming you? And they said, we don't like your government at all, but you're human beings. We love you. I've had similar conversations over and over and over again from folks who are really suffering under the power of the system. They are not, sure there are radicals, sure there are extremists who are driven by hate, But as a whole, this myth that all Palestinians want the Israelis to go away or die is just fallacious. Also, water. Water was something I learned a lot about this last visit. The notion that Israel actually controls all the aquifers, even though some percentage that I can't quote are under Palestinian land. And so we asked one guy that we were talking to, when was the last time you had water? And he said, it's been 3 weeks. And we said, 3 weeks? How do you live without water for 3 weeks? He says, we have to buy it off the black market. And that was just mind-boggling to me. When just practically within sight are settlements with swimming pools and fountains. That's just a fundamental human rights issue. Our tour of East Jerusalem exposed this dynamic. When you look out over Jerusalem and you can see West Jerusalem where there are cranes because people are always building and adding on, East Jerusalem is a sad place. It's dusty and it's the roads haven't been repaved since before '67. We toured them. In East Jerusalem, no building permits are ever granted. So when families grow and they want to add on, they add on illegally, which then, of course, makes them vulnerable to a home demolition, which may or may not happen. So there's this just the freedom to expand your own home as your family grows seems like a pretty basic human right and a clear differentiation that you can see with the naked eye. But the notion that and the reality that Palestinians are regularly kidnapped, taken by Israeli army forces, and not infrequently killed. We had an incident in mid-May when 2 Palestinians on Nakba Day were killed, and the instance was caught on camera. And a lot of folks thought, this will get international attention. They maybe had thrown stones, I'm not sure, but they posed no significant threat, and they were killed. So that the kind of violence that happened to the American teenager in East Jerusalem happens with some degree of frequency in the Palestinian territories. And just the understanding that a lot of boys have in the Palestinian population that they will spend time in prison. And we spoke to several who said, I never picked up a rock and I went to prison. And these are Christians and Muslims. And we heard stories of practices called a straw widow, where the Israeli soldiers go in and take over a Palestinian home. They only take over the home of a Palestinian who's really not a threat, but they use it to then monitor the area. And so the family is either kicked out or forced into one room. And this soldier was so vulnerable and so honest. And he said, I went in to my time of service in the IDF just committed to being a good soldier. I wasn't even going to sit on their furniture. I was never going to take anything from their refrigerator. And I certainly was not going to treat Palestinian people with disrespect. He had the highest and most noble of intentions. And he said, after a year of doing what was asked of me, I lost my moral grounding. He said, and I am so ashamed to admit that. And we were just so moved by his honesty and his candor and his conviction that motivated him to lead tours in Hebron within earshot of the soldiers who were listening on. So he really described the nature of the occupation from the soldier's standpoint in a way that you really couldn't doubt what he had to say. He was a credible witness because he was the perpetrator rather than the victim. And that's a group that is about 10,000 strong now of former soldiers. They really look inward and they say, what have we done that has been corrosive within our life together as God's people that has led in this direction? And I think, while I think there's some danger in in a victim, assigning blame to the victim's self. I think that you have to be careful about that. I do think that in the case of Israel, a really helpful security strategy would be to say, what are the things that we are doing that stoke this hostility and this aggression? And I think, the current bombing campaign in Gaza is really effective at making people feel powerless and angry and violent.